It's here, the 6th annual SysDig Cloud Native Security and Container Usage Report. Get real-world, actionable security insights from companies using cloud and containers from industries around the world. For example, did you know that 87% of container images in production include a high or critical vulnerability? That's up from 75% last year. Or do you realize that companies running Kubernetes clusters larger than 1,000 nodes could save over $10 million a year? With deep runtime insights, SysDig delivers cloud and container security so you can stop attacks without wasting time. You can find all the details by downloading your copy of the report for free at sysdig.com/usage report. That's sysdig.com/usage report.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Getting to the end of February 2023, almost March is upon us. So, 1/6 of the year is already gone. 16% or so of the year is already gone. Again, Sunny Perspective Show. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to dive into what, sometimes you do this for long enough and you start to feel like, okay, technology. We've seen this incremental change. And there's been some stuff over the last, few weeks, few months in which it feels like we're just at the beginning of what is going to be the next sort of big phase of the internet. I know we've gone through some stuff. We lived through kind of the giant crypto scam of 2020 through 2023. We've lived through, the kind of VR, AR kind of thing, which, we're still not totally sure what that's going to be. We've seen this buzz about the metaverse and what that could be and seen, companies like Facebook make, huge investments in that. But those things haven't really panned out necessarily. As I'm thinking about this, there's a couple of things that are starting to sort of jump out at me as what feels like is going to be sort of the next phase of how the internet's going to get paid for. And I don't talk about that in the same context as we would like, hey, this is a new technology trend where we saw like, mainframe to mini computer to PC to web to mobile, all that sort of stuff. But it feels like we're getting right at the precipice of a next generation of internet. Not so much in terms of technology, but how it's going to be paid for. And so let me kind of walk through where I'm going with this and then what we're going to get to after the break. So, for those of you that, are older, have seen some things over the years, a lot of this history. For some of you that are newer, this may be, you may not at all be aware of it because you don't care. It never was part of your life. But basically the internet's gone through about 4 or 5 different, maybe 5 or 6 different iterations of essentially how things are paid for. So the original internet, paid for by the U.S. Department of Defense as part of a project called ARPANET or DARPA, sometimes you'll hear, but kind of the original, Vinton Cerf era of, connecting the universities, a few of the universities and a few different government agencies to do a lot of research work, right? So that was kind of the original way the original internet was funded. And then we began to see these walled gardens be built. So things like America Online or AOL, we saw things like Compuserve, we saw a number of different, things like that. But they were essentially, you dialed into some sort of proprietary service owned by a single company. Yes, there were a bunch of message boards and a bunch of content that was created, but essentially it was a walled garden. It wasn't the open internet that we knew. You signed up for a service, you had a username on there. It was kind of the baby internet, if you will, but it really wasn't an open internet. And then we began to see the rise of a bunch of open technologies. So we saw the rise of web browsers, we saw the rise of search engines, and we began to see the beginning of the open internet. So, people could go access this internet thing, the www, the HTTP, the, IP address stuff that people are used to seeing. We saw a number of browsers, things like Netscape and other stuff that kind of came out at that point. And then we began to see the origin of search engines. So things like Yahoo is the kind of the original search engine of like what is out there on the open internet, because I don't have a map to it. I don't, it was very different than what we saw with the AOLs of the world, where they sort of, mapped out everything that was available and they guided you through it. This was, the Wild West. What's out there? It was like being Lewis and Clark, if you will, of exploring. And then we began to see kind of the rise of consumer broadband and over-the-top services, right? So people started having They went from, a dial-up modem to being like, hey, that's a hassle. I don't want to do that. I want to get to the internet faster. And so that we began paying, to have internet to our home, internet to our businesses. And then we began seeing over-the-top services, so things that, what we now think of as SaaS services, but they were, at the time considered over-the-top services because the broadband services provided by telephone companies and cable companies were also trying to provide their own version of the internet, or their own, music service, or food ordering service, or web hosting service. And so we began to see sort of over the top, what we call over the top services. So companies like Netflix or other things that were just entirely a service on the internet that weren't tied to a specific internet service provider. They weren't tied to a specific telco or cable company. They were just out there freely on the internet, right? Google search, stuff like that. And then we began to see really advertising becoming the dominant business model. And this has really, continued throughout the last 20 or so years as really the dominant business model of, how are all these free services that we've come to know and love, whether it's search or maps or weather services or stock services or, all sorts of different things, how have they been essentially subsidized and paid for? And it's primarily been through ad businesses, and not just Google's business, but lots of others. So I think we're beginning to see not the end of the ad business or the end of search as it is, but really the precipice of what I think is going to become what will be the next thing, the next experience, the way that things are funded. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we're going to kind of dive into it after the break. Is your cloud bill out of control? CloudZero is building a platform that will let you analyze your cloud investment faster than ever before. You'll get accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. CloudZero is how cloud-driven companies gain more financial control and predictability by driving immediate and ongoing savings. You can answer questions like, how can I save 20% of my cloud bill right now? Who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. Again, please visit cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today.
We all know that running global-scale multi-cloud applications is difficult and expensive, but being locked into a single cloud provider sucks. That's why our friends at Section created the platform for easy and cost-effective multi-cloud operations. Section actually makes it easier to operate multi-cloud than on your current single cloud. Applications run in the best locations for end-user performance, reliability, and security, and you get to focus on building your apps, not your infrastructure. Visit section.io/cloudcast to sign up for free with no credit card required. You can be running in under a minute. That's section.io/cloudcast.
And we're back. And I mentioned, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dive into what feels like really the beginning, the earliest inklings or telltale signs that we may be getting into what's going to be a different way in which we're going to pay for the internet in various different ways. So let me kind of walk through some of this stuff. So obviously, for those of you that have been around for a little while, let's say the last 20 or so years. You've gotten very used to an internet that, essentially you pay for a way to get on the internet. That might be broadband to your home. That might just be, free Wi-Fi in a coffee shop. Somehow you are getting on the internet and you're paying some nominal monthly fee for that, basically for access to bandwidth. And then beyond that, there's so much of the internet that is readily free, whether they are blogs or they're websites or whether they are, services like search or maps or YouTube or whatever it might be. And obviously we've seen a number of services that aren't entirely ad driven. We've been able to buy a Netflix account for whatever, $10, $12, $15 a month. And they've been able to, do that without ads for a long period of time. But so much of the internet, so much of the things that we use every day are driven basically because, whether it's Google ads, whether it's Facebook ads, whether it's Amazon ads or Apple ads or whatever, or the services that are providing those ads, it's been driven around this idea that search essentially, guides us around the internet. Ads go along with that search, and that search again could be Google search, it could be searching through stuff on Facebook or on Amazon or some shopping site or whatever. And then as, targeted information comes back about what you're interested in, the cookies that have been following you around the internet, ads are served up to you to try and, get you to buy something. So essentially subsidizing what you do. In the same way that the way that television originated, it was a medium to a mechanism to sell ads. And, still, if you watch any sort of television for the most part today, ads are part of the viewing experience, whether you're watching a series, you're watching The Bachelor, you're watching live sports, or whatever you're watching, ads are part of that. And that's created an interesting experience on the internet. Now, people can get frustrated about ads. They can employ technologies like ad blockers to try and prevent them. But it has been a very, very efficient way to subsidize the internet for millions and in many cases billions of people. And it has had some people would say negative, adverse effects. You have sort of huge monopolies that are continuing to make more and more money off of ads, as well as things like Amazon doing retail or Apple selling phones or whatever it might be. But it has been a massive, massive subsidy to most of the world as end users to be able to use the internet in that way. Now, when I talked about at the beginning of the show, it feels like we're at the beginning of something that is a few things that are beginning to very much disrupt that. I want to highlight what I think those things are. And for a lot of people, these are going to be pretty well known, but it kind of dawned on me also seeing a number of things over the last couple of weeks that it feels like we're beginning to move into a new stage. And so those two things that are really beginning to do that, the first was Apple with iOS, with their, not monopoly in mobile phones, because obviously Android has the largest number of users, but Apple has, probably the most, well-to-do users. They tend to cater to a higher end crowd. Obviously, they sell a premium device. People are paying for services on top of that. Apple essentially was trying to take a stance of they want to be, your privacy provider for the internet. They want to try and cut down on how much of your data is given back to various companies who then try and monetize you. And so they introduced something called ATT, or Apple App Tracking Transparency. So what this is if you're an Apple phone user, you know that anytime you install an app or you begin using an app, it'll oftentimes ask you, do you want this app to track you? And, it now requires every application to ask a user if that is. And they're seeing more and more users saying, no, please don't track me. And so what the consequence of that is that, for many, many, many applications, whether they are social media applications or retail or, whatever they might be that have to do with it, tracks your location or tracks your buying habits or tracks where you go, that information is no longer passed back to the advertisers, right? And so we've seen some far-flung ramifications of this in the near term. We've seen it have severe impacts to Facebook, somewhere in the order of $10 billion loss over the last year or so from not being able to track ads the way they were before. We've seen Spotify. We've seen a number of the social media platforms. But we've also seen this have huge impact, not only like on Facebook, but on small business companies who rely on advertising to reach people that they're trying to reach to. So as much as people maybe don't like big box buyers, big box retail, they want people to encourage to buy from smaller shops and to buy locally. Smaller shops are being impacted by this decision by Apple to impact tracking, right? So that has a huge downstream effect. It's going to impact a number of companies that are totally reliant on advertising and data to drive what they do, right? The second thing, it makes people like Apple more powerful. Okay, not that they necessarily needed any more power in the giant tech ecosystem, but it's making all these companies that are totally reliant on advertising or on tracking to change, how they're figuring out who you are, what your behaviors are, what's, is advertising still going to be a dominant thing? Yeah, probably. But, will they be able to do it with the same accuracy and hence the same cost efficiency as they did before? No, absolutely not. And so what that means is, for one giant stone in the big, change shifting of kind of the underlying, infrastructure of the internet, it means the cost of doing advertising has gone way up, and will go up over time because, again, it's harder and harder to figure out all of this precise tracking that they were able to do. And then secondarily, what that means is as that becomes more expensive to figure out how to target you, to serve you an ad, to hopefully get you to buy something or whatever, the companies that provide those things over the internet are now going to look to recoup their cost in various ways to say, okay, I may have to charge more for my services. I may have to charge more for my goods. I may have to charge more for other types of things because the efficiency of advertising is not what it was before, right? So that's one huge pillar in this, kind of shifting of, the infrastructure of the internet and how we paid for it and what was subsidized. The second one, there was an interesting article that came out this week. It basically said, everybody's favorite discussion point so far this year has been ChatGPT and the things that are happening with OpenAI and sort of this new way of searching, this conversational way of searching, and kind of all the interesting ramifications or interesting downstream ramifications that might be coming from that. And basically, what it said was, chat style search will now cost 10 times more for companies like Google and Microsoft, and presumably, anybody who's relying on the GPT-3, eventually GPT-4 types of technologies, is that the cost of that search is going to be 10 times as expensive as it was for previous search that Google and other people did. And what that likely is going to mean is over time that number will come down, but the processing power that it requires to do the types of search and putting information, the results and the answers back to you is going to be, again, an order of magnitude, maybe multiple orders of magnitude more expensive than it was before. So again, the things that Google was able to do at massive scale and massive profitability levels, that in essence would allow them to subsidize a whole bunch of free services. So whether that is, Maps or Gmail or Android operating system or, Google Weather or Google Flights or Google Stocks or all these types of services that, Microsoft would subsidize or, others would subsidize, is now going to be, potentially at risk of no longer being free, right? And so the reason I bring all this stuff up is I think we're going to begin to get into an era, and we've already seen this in certain industries, in which the internet that we've all sort of known and grown to love because so many powerful things were freely available to us. I think we're going to begin to see sort of the a la carting of the internet. And we've already begun to see this in a number of little things here and there, but the little things start to add up and you start to go, okay, I see why they're doing that, right? And some of them, may seem weird. Some of them may seem, unusual or frustrating. But just a couple of them that jumped out at me. Obviously we've seen this. We've seen this to a certain extent in media consumption for a while. We've seen how we all used to buy our TV services from you'd buy like a bundle. In the United States, you'd buy like the cable bundle, or you'd buy a TV service packaged with your internet service. Maybe you buy it from AT&T or Verizon or whatever it might be, or Comcast. And then we've seen, over the last decade or so, 5-6 years, just a sprawl of streaming services from Hulu to Netflix to, over-the-top services to, whatever it might be. Could be, Fubo to get your soccer matches. It could be ESPN Plus. It could be Disney Plus. It could be whatever. So we've seen this decoupling of what used to be the cable bundle, but now the price of that is, in many cases, depending on how many services you wanted to get or how many things you want to make sure you have access to, movies and sports and whatever, can, now be even more so than it was when it was the cable bundle that people were frustrated that prices were so high. So we've we've already gone through this phenomenon to a certain extent, but it was really kind of felt like it was confined to media. And now it feels like it's going to become, probably widely proliferated. And a couple of things sort of jumped out at me as just little examples of this. So, in the sort of what people might consider non-technology region, BMW here recently started charging monthly for heated seats. And you think about that and you go, boy, I just spent $50, $60, $70, $80,000 for this luxury vehicle, and then they're going to charge me a monthly fee for heated seats. That seems very odd. Like, why would they do that? They're not charging me, a monthly fee for the blinker. Well, the reason for that is because we've now also created a culture because of the ability of the internet to do mass customizations. Everybody's experience on the internet, everybody's experience with their mobile phone, all these things are highly, highly customizable. And so I'm sure BMW was getting requests from people going, or they, were thinking about this as an organization and saying, well, we're going to embed the technology into the product, but there's going to be people who, don't want to pay for it in the summertime because you don't need heated seats in the summertime when it's warm, but in the wintertime you do. And, maybe that's something we want to start thinking about is maybe we aren't charging people up front for it and amortizing that over the cost of a, long-term cost of a car, but we can begin to start to think about how do we a la carte and get recurring revenue from a vehicle beyond just the one time that we do that, right? So kind of an example of like, okay, that used to be part of the price. I didn't have to think about it. And now you're coming back and telling me that you're going to make this a recurring revenue thing. And I have to think about turning it on. I have to think about turning it off. And, is that really what we wanted the end result to be? Right. Just recently, big kerfuffle on the internet. Twitter has decided to start charging for SMS-based two-factor authentication. And people could argue, well, this is just part of all the crazy things that Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, and he's messing things up and he's breaking things, and but again, this is one of those things where if you got 400 million users, depending on how often that two-factor authentication is happening, they're struggling with their ad business. The ad business is nowhere near even the bad ad business that it was with Twitter before you bought it, and you start looking at, okay, what little thing are creating costs for me that I could possibly pass along to the user. So, this two-factor authentication is just one of those things that becomes a add-on, becomes a, how do I get recurring revenue out of you when the ad part of my business is not what it used to be. It's not, as robust. And people could argue, well, that's a weird example because, Elon Musk is destroying Twitter single-handedly himself. But, it's an example of a business that was, fundamentally based on ad revenue. The ad revenue is not there. You're going to start getting charged for little things here and there. We saw last year where Google started, eliminating free Gmail accounts. You had to, at some point, if you wanted more storage or if you wanted more whatever, you used to get unlimited storage with this. You had to sign up for more of a, Google suite for doing this. So there are lots and lots of examples out there. And, we've seen some of these things with, add-in purchases with, in-app buys for games and so forth. But I think those two fundamental things, the cost of search potentially going way up if people start to really like this ChatGPT style way of getting search. We know that it's very expensive. It's obviously, we're seeing a lot of people backlogged to being able to try the service because they can't just give it away for free. And then AT&T, or not ATT, Apple introducing this idea of ATT and making it more difficult to kind of granularly track people for ads. Those two things together are going to drive the cost of search up. It's going to drive the cost of advertising up. And as those things go up, the ability for them to augment and give away for free in order to collect data from you that they could then monetize at a much higher rate is going to drive a lot of companies and a lot of different services to start, basically kind of nickel and diming you and a la carting you in all aspects of the internet. And we've seen it again, both in services that we use every day, but also it's going to bleed over into consumer services, consumer devices, and could at some point bleed into enterprise devices. So I think we're at the beginning of what's going to be the new way that, whether we like it or not, we're going to be asked to pay for the internet. We have all become incredibly dependent upon the internet for pretty much, very large swaths of our everyday life, whether it's our business life, whether it's the way we interact with our friends and family, whether it's how we, get communication or entertainment or sports or whatever it might be. But I think a couple of these big changes, especially around, the cost of search and the cost of advertising, which have been, heavily subsidizing so many people's experience of the internet, is going to come back, and people are going to be looking for that cost to be reimbursed in one way, shape, or form, whether it's new subscriptions to services that used to be free, whether it's paying for individual features or making you make a trade-off of, do you want a secure experience versus an insecure experience? We're going to be seeing this over and over again. And the reason for it goes back to those two fundamental things. The cost of search and the cost of advertising is going to begin to incrementally creep up, because the ability to impact that and disrupt that is beginning to happen. And we're seeing it from Apple, and we're seeing it from Microsoft and OpenAI. They're both going after Google's, humongously profitable, massively profitable monopolies around those two things, search and advertising. And that's going to have huge downstream ripple effects throughout the internet. So it'll be very, very interesting to watch. For those of you that just follow this show for cloud computing, it'll be really interesting to watch how much this impacts Google Cloud, because, it has been operating at a loss for its entire existence. And so, does Google raise prices? Does Google continue to prioritize it? Do they continue to subsidize it? All those sort of things have, downstream ripple effects when their core business is very much under attack. So something interesting to watch, something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on throughout the year and the next couple of years. Because again, as much as the technology is always interesting in this space, being able to follow the money, understand the business models is equally, if not more important than all of it. Because at some point, somebody's got to pay for this. And at some point, somebody wants to be rewarded for coming up with the innovation and the operations of running these things. So anyways, apologize for my voice. As I mentioned before, we are right in the middle of spring here in North Carolina, which means pollen season, which means my allergies are horrible and my voice gets bad this time of year. So I apologize for the scratchiness. Thank you for putting up with it. Hopefully it doesn't last too much longer, but it might be a few more episodes. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody is excited about March. March is springtime for many of us in the Northern Hemisphere. I guess it'd be fall for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere. But anyways, we will be back this week with a couple of very interesting shows. We are getting very close to our 700th show. This is show number 697. So within about a week or so here, we will be hitting milestone 700. So very, very excited about that. Thank you all for listening, whether you've listened for one show or 700 shows. Thanks for telling a friend. We've continuing to grow the show, I think 25-30% this year, which has been fantastic. So thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.